Welcome back to Harbour Unboxed. Tim's here with me, and we are doing Q&A stuff. And
Apparently,
I think this is a bonus round, isn't it? A part 3? Did we do that? We didn't do that last month, did we? Because we did it at Computex.
I think so. Mm-hmm. It's hard to remember because Computex seems like it was a long time ago, but it wasn't. No. And been busy doing stuff. But anyway, I think it's, part 3, bonus round, more questions. Enjoy it.
We'll get into it. But before we do, today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Insta360 and the new Link 4K AI-powered webcam, which has a few neat features. First of all, half-inch sensor, so the image quality that you're seeing here, very good for a little webcam, and excellent audio. The audio is, of course, also coming through the Link. And, as you can see, I'm not quite centered correctly, but rather than have to get up there and mess around or adjust any software, I merely just have to make this gesture. Wait a moment. And now we are in follow mode, and that means the webcam will follow me. So if I come over here like that, it'll track me. I can pick up an RTX 4070, show you that. If I put that up there, it'll autofocus very nicely. Put that back down. If I whip over here to show you another RTX 4070, you get the same thing. Come back, and the 3-axis gimbal allows the camera to follow me very nicely. And of course, half-inch sensor, great 4K image, and very impressive audio for a little webcam. I think it's a great product. So for more information, please check the link in the video description. Okay, what are your feelings overall on the GPU market? Do you guys get demoralized by having to review such bad launches? What are your thoughts on where this is all going? So, I'll admit the last few GPU, well, more than the last few, but the last few in particular, I've sort of got the product, I've tested it, I've looked at the price, and I'm like, oh, I don't even want to write the script, Tim. Like, you do get over it at some point. I hate whinging about them constantly. Like you guys, I want to get excited about the new products. I want to tell you about this new exciting product. Look, it's sort of exciting. You guys getting to discover how cool this product is and how much you're going to want to buy it, rather than me being like, yeah, it's garbage. Like, don't buy it. Wait until it halves in price, and then we'll talk about it then. So yeah, a bit demoralizing. Definitely makes the job harder. Like, people probably think as YouTubers we love crap products because we do like crap product in the thumbnail. I think there's a massive misconception there.
It's worse for the channel.
It's worse for the channel. The video initially may do better. To be fair, I think generally you'll get a lot more views on a positive product because people are excited by it, and therefore when you're excited about something, you're looking into it.
They want the information.
And you don't just watch one review from Gamers Nexus or us or Linus or whoever it may be and go, well, that sucked. I don't really feel like watching 20 other reviews. You might watch one more review, and if you go from like us to Gamers Nexus or vice versa, and we both say the same thing, you're probably done with your research there. Whereas if it's an amazing product, you're wanting to find out more. And how does it perform in this game? Did they include a game that I'm interested in? You get excited about it and you invest a lot more time. And then for us, we can go make a lot more content. We can do roundups, big benchmark comparisons, buying guides. We can do build guides that we don't do anymore because the industry kind of sucks. There's just limitless content that we could be producing around great products. Around crap products, it's kind of like, well, I'm not doing a build on this thing because I've already said don't buy it. So yeah, it's just hard to get motivated, hard to get out of bed in the morning and go do all the testing and spend the days upon days and late nights piecing together a day one review where you're just like down in the dumps about it.
Yep. How do you feel about other tech YouTubers using your data/graphs? I imagine it's usually not a big problem when it's properly referenced.
Probably or properly? Probably properly?
It says properly here.
Okay,
so cool. We'll go with that. When it's properly referenced, but what about when it's not? I believe there's some YouTubers that have used graphs before, not referenced them. Not really sure about that, but...
Yeah, well, as for the first part, like, I love other YouTubers using our data and referencing that and putting their spin on it or adding their 2 cents worth. That's fine. Don't have a problem with that. Yeah, love to see that. That's great. As for the not referencing them correctly, I haven't really seen... I can't recall an account of that happening, but I'm sure it has happened. Whatever, that's not ideal, but it probably reflects poorly on the person that's doing it. That's sort of not giving credit to the people they're making content off the back of, but whatever, I don't.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't love it if someone made a video where it's just our graphs and no commentary, like they're just sort of basically stealing the work. But I think most people are using our data and graphs and they're adding their own spin to it. Like they're interpreting the data in their own way, sort of making their conclusion like we make our conclusions in our videos. I think that's perfectly fine, as long as you're not using all the graphs. Like it's probably best idea not to use all of them, but fair use type stuff is perfectly fine. I think it adds to it. You're more people talking about stuff, so yeah, it makes sense.
How much do you think the alleged 5600X 3D will cost, and how much should it cost? So there's 5800X 3D, Zen 3 AM4 CPU, popular CPU. There now sounds like there could be a 6-core version in the works, which would be surprising to me, but also, I don't know. Let's not speculate as to how real this alleged CPU is. How much should it cost? Because that was the question. And I would say based on how much the 5600X costs relative to the 5800X and how much the 5800X 3D costs relative to the 5800X, I would say a 5600X 3D would have to cost no more than $250 in the current market, with the 5800X 3D being $330.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, like, you have to think about the AM4 platform. It's no longer the premium platform. AM5 is where a lot of the focus is going. So you're thinking, like, what market is a 5600X 3D really targeting? Like, obviously, people going for that upgrade path are probably going to be more tempted by the 5800 model.
I would have thought so.
So the 5600 model is like...
It'd have to be a fair bit cheaper.
Yeah, a fair bit cheaper to make it make sense for people to sort of go, oh, no, I won't spend the $330. I'll spend the $250 instead. But yeah, so it sort of sits in that weird position where it's like it's targeting upgraders on the AM4 platform who, don't want to go to the full-priced 58 model, but then the 5800X 3D isn't that expensive as far as CPUs are concerned. It's more mid-range pricing at the moment. Yeah,
really, it would have to be like $200 for you to go, oh, I don't really want to spend $130, $150 more.
Yeah.
If you had like a Ryzen 5 first gen or a Zen Plus second gen type CPU, you probably spend about $200 on that. And if for some reason you've held on to that all this time despite the plethora of upgrade options you've had over the last 5 years, then if you get a $200 5600X 3D, then that, I imagine for most people that would be too tempting to ignore. Because buying a new AM5 motherboard, CPU, DDR5 memory, all that, like the cheapest you can sort of do that for reasonably is around $500. So if you can get what would be doubling your CPU gaming performance, essentially going from like a 1600 or 2600 or maybe even a 3600 to a 5600X 3D, pretty awesome upgrade if it was $200. Obviously, $250 max. Anything more than that, it's just silly CPU that didn't need to be released. I think if it's $200, that would be pretty amazing and a great value CPU for those already on the AM4 platform.
Yeah, I always find it really hard to sort of rank those mid-range, mid-tier products. Like, how low do they need to go to separate it? What's the sort of bang for buck segment? And a lot of the time, I feel that those mid-range products sort of sit in no man's land a bit with pricing. So hopefully, if this product is real, that AMD resist the temptation to just plonk it in the no man's land where most people would either go higher or lower, and they really try target more that lower segment and really give people bang for buck, which $200 I think would be.
I suspect if they do release it, it'd be like a Ryzen 3 3100/3300X type situation where there's not that much supply of it. Yep. Which, if that's the case, then $250 seems like the minimum they would go.
I mean, if it's just the cut down dies they've accumulated over the years of selling the 5800 model, then you'd think that it would be sort of a limited time run. Yeah,
so it's an interesting one. It'd be a cool product to see for just like for benchmarking and exploration. That would be a very cool product to have. But we'll see if it happens. What do you guys think about the massive price drops on Amazon on the new generations of graphics cards? What does it mean for the future? Will Nvidia cards finally start getting meaningful discounts? At what prices exactly do you think some of the cards start making actual sense? Exactly, Tim. I want a full breakdown analysis. Go.
Well, luckily, we already did that.
Yes,
in the previous Q&A. So if you want to answer on what the cards should be and what they're priced at, I think we covered that in the May Q&A. But as for the rest of it with like Amazon price drops, I mean, it's going to be for the products that are in the least demand, least interesting.
Have they been massive, the price drops?
And yes, massive is over-exaggerating the situation. I think the RX 7600 has dropped by like $20, which is far from massive. The 7900 XT is probably
More massive.
More massive. It's over $100 discount now.
More towards massive.
But we're still not, like a massive discount will be like 30% off, which is not the case. So yeah, Amazon's really doing the thing that we've seen with other retailers as well, where, yeah, products just aren't moving. So they're discounting them. They're potentially getting a bit of assistance from Nvidia or AMD to do that. But we're not going to see that for the in-demand products. So, or, don't know whether in-demand's the right word, but the less not in demand. So an RTX 4070 is probably a product that's selling reasonably well from the current generation at $600. Relative. Again, it's all relative because it's not selling well compared to previous generations, but it's selling well relative to current gen. So that card unlikely to be discounted heavily from its $600 price. But something like the 4080 has already dropped to $1,100-ish. Not sure about on Amazon, but certainly at Newegg, that's sort of a typical price. So yeah, usually it comes down to AMD or Nvidia providing a little bit of assistance. It seems like AMD's more willing to adjust prices in response to lower demand or the sort of reception, which is why the 7900 XT is now $900 is not really a price you'd pay for that anymore. And they've definitely done it with RDNA 2 significantly across the lineup. So I expect more of that from them. But Nvidia seems to be more hesitant to do things like that. And if we are going to see flash sales, it may take until the next gen for cards like a 4070 to drop in price, or even 4070 Ti. So I'd be keeping an eye on the 4060 Ti though. It doesn't seem like that card has sold many at all. Maybe we'll see some price cuts on that, like a 4080, but it's very new. So
I mean, it really has to drop to $300 for it to be worth buying.
Yeah, it's a big discount. That would be a massive discount.
Which then would put the 4060 needing to go down closer to $200. And
it causes a ripple effect, which is problematic. So, yeah, we'll just keep tracking that. Keep an eye on our GPU pricing updates. What features should motherboard manufacturers add or bring to lower price points to make the next round of releases more desirable? I think we sort of saw something like this at Computex.
Yeah,
Which isn't really more features, I guess. It was more removing features to make it cheaper.
Yeah, I think for gamers in particular, but then just general users as well. But let's say gamers or those doing sort of productivity on the mainstream platform, I think really what people want to see is just a decent quality VRM that can run any and all CPUs that are on the platform or intended for the platform at reasonable temperatures, like sub 80 degrees, let's say, with minimal airflow. And then just a decent array of USB ports, some reasonable nothing crazy. Like they don't need 10 gigabit networking, for example. And if you want that, you can just add that. The most cost-effective way is to get a PCI Express card and add that in. So I think a manufacturer that makes a product line, whether it's like an MSI Tomahawk or an Asus Prime, that is a reliably good series. Like they keep tainting these series. Like they'll release a Tomahawk board that'll be amazing, and then they'll release one that's not particularly great. Or, we've just seen recently the Asus Prime series just on B650 kind of sucks. 100 degree plus VRM thermals and features are pretty light and pricing's not great. So I think in a nutshell, people want, as I said, a board with a good VRM that supports all CPUs, current, future, whatever it's going to be on the platform at comfortable temperatures.
Yep.
And that has all the essentials at a good price. And you have the option of an ATX version and a micro ATX version. And an ITX version would be cool as well, but they're a bit more costly because generally you have to up the capacity of the power stages there because you can fit less of them and there's less cooling and all that sort of stuff. But I think ATX board, micro ATX board with a reasonable feature set but a good quality VRM that can run everything, I think that would be a winner, really.
Yeah, and I've always been of the opinion, I don't know if I'm alone in this, in thinking that like the motherboard is one of the least important components from an aesthetics part of the build.
With black heat sinks,
so
whatever.
A lot of the more premium boards that we see, they increase the quality and design of the VRM cooling. They add RGB. The extra premium motherboards have screens in them. There's lighting, all these things, which I think most gamers aren't really super interested in having that. Like, yeah, sure, on a GPU or on a cooler where that's sort of more prominent in the build if you're going from an aesthetic standpoint. Whereas the motherboard's always the furthest back. It's kind of hard to see, especially depending on your orientation of other components, that the more basic sort of, keep it plain. Don't go crazy with colors, like very plain, basic, but then have all the essentials as you were talking about.
I mean, realistically, because what you're describing is what you're saying is don't make motherboards to justify or try and justify a high asking price, which is essentially all those boards are, right?
Yeah.
Because you could make what I said, a board with a decent VRM, and then just use the CPU and chipset features, and you've got basically all the essentials you need. Like you don't need lane splitters and, USB 4 added in and stuff like that. If people want to do that, they can do add-in cards. So really, motherboards really only need to be quite simple.
Yeah, I would have thought more differentiating features would be things like Wi-Fi versus non-Wi-Fi, like number of USB ports, things like, how many M.2 slots are there on the board. Like, obviously, a more entry-level board would have a few, and then you get the premium boards that have lots. These are the sort of things that I would have thought would make more sense as you go from like $100, $200, $300. You're getting like 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 M.2 slots and things like that, as opposed to what most brands seem to do, which is the very basic boards have like garbage features, like very bare bones, and then you step it up a little bit, and then it's like, yeah, and then the next tier up has both all the features you want and all this unnecessary RGB.
A 16-phase, 105 amp power. Yeah.
So it goes from garbage to like good, but also unnecessary. And I feel like if there's something that's sort of in that middle zone, it'll make a lot of sense.
I want some of those features on the high-end board, but I don't necessarily need a VRM that's capable of delivering enough power for 3 7950Xs. Like, just one's okay. I'm only going to put one on there.
Yeah.
So I don't need, and if they want to make an overclocking focus version that has, a VRM from a TRX 40 board, then sure, do that. But
that should be like godlikes and stuff. Like, that's what that's for.
Yeah. Anyway, so just a well-rounded, affordable board that has the essentials would be nice. I think that.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you guys think the new naming scheme of future Intel CPUs are a deliberate attempt at confusing the consumer in a similar way Nvidia did with their GDDR4, but it was a DDR4 version, so no G, just DDR4 version of the GT 1030 GPUs? If so, would you guys elaborate on why?
Yeah, I mean, the new naming scheme, in my opinion, isn't very good. It doesn't make a lot of sense to kill off the well-known Core i branding. And at least I think it is a bit confusing to introduce this sort of Ultra thing in there, where there's going to be like a Intel Core 9 and also an Intel Core Ultra 9. And that's going to be the case right through Core 7 and Core 5. And weren't they even talking about not talking about like the generation of the product in the model name or something?
Yeah, I haven't. I guess I'm just waiting for it to be rolled out and see how it plays out there to really give my thoughts on it and how misleading it is or whatever. It definitely does not seem like a step in the right direction. So the Core i5, Core i7, Core i9 designations, they were all good. Then you had the product name after it, which has slowly and continually got further and further out of control to the point where you've got things like a 13900KS, and then the laptop stuff's even worse. So that was kind of garbage. Unclear if that part of it's been addressed. But then, the Ultra stuff and all that, really confusing, bit of a mess. I think it's probably a step in the wrong direction. I don't know how they've managed to achieve that, but okay. But again, I'm just going to wait and see what we end up with before I give my full opinion on that one. But so far, not looking promising.
Yeah, I think what maybe the question's alluding to is sort of the potential for, say, a Core 9. Sorry, it's going to be very difficult to avoid the Core i, but where a Core 9 non-Ultra part performs worse than, say, a Core 7 Ultra or Core Ultra 7, but is potentially still priced like a Core 9, maybe in an OEM system or a laptop or something. There is that potential for confusion there and sort of causing those issues by having the Ultra and non-Ultra. But again, we sort of have to wait to see whether they do that, because they may still name it properly. What we do know is that the 14th gen desktop parts are not going to be using this naming scheme, or at least very likely not to. It seems like we will be getting like a 14900K instead of a Core Ultra 9 something. So
well, that's a problem in on itself that we haven't even discussed. And again, we'll wait till we get to the reviews of that. But that seems like it's going to be a refreshed Raptor Lake generation, which means it's not a brand new architecture. It's a refined version of what we already had, which typically means it's an incremental update, which generally speaking doesn't warrant a whole new generation type naming.
No, it'd be like a 13950K or something.
That's what it should be, as bad as that sounds. But again, we don't know what they bring to the table, so I can't really comment yet. But if it's a small incremental update, then clearly they're trying to generate hype and sales and lead people to believe it's more than just a typical refresh. But anyway, we'll wait and see how that plays out before we comment on it, but that's what it seemed like.
Well, I believe they have said the naming scheme will be introduced with Media Lake, which is their 15th. Upcoming, I don't know whether it's 14th or 15th. Again, if they're getting rid of the generations, who knows?
It should be the 14th.
But that's a big architecture overhaul. I believe it's designed primarily for mobile systems, so laptops and those sorts of things. So again, laptop naming is real bad. So we'll see what they do there, but I wouldn't hold my breath for it to work out well, unfortunately.
Oh, well, this is interesting. A question here from our video editor, Balin. And Balin asks, why is the last 20 minutes or so of the Q&A missing the A roll? And why do I have to fill in random B roll over all of that audio? Well, good question, Bale. Let me quickly explain to you and the audience what happened here. So Tim and I filmed an hour of the Q&A. We hit pause on the camera and the audio recorder. We copied that data off as we normally do. And then we set out to film another hour. We got an hour and 2 minutes into filming and the Panasonic GH6 camera, which we were using, just turned off. We were using the DC power because the battery usually doesn't last that long. Camera turned off and we get a corrupt movie file, MOV file. Unrepairable, tried all the various different ways of trying to repair it. Couldn't salvage that hour and 2 minutes of filming, which we've never had that problem before with the GH6. Anyway, decided let's just suck it up. We won't be lazy. We'll just do the whole hour and something again because, well, that's what we've got to do. So we filmed 20 minutes and everything went well. We stopped the camera and we decided to continue on. We went for another 42 minutes and before we were on the very last question, halfway through it and the camera turned off again. So I think we've got a bad power pack, not sure. But either way, the Panasonic GH6 isn't suitable for those long form videos. If something like that happens, you can't, it doesn't run off battery. So, it does run off battery, but if you want to run it off mains power, the mains power adapter thing goes in where the battery is and there's no backup power. So long story short, Tim uses a Blackmagic Cinema Pocket 4K camera thing. I've bought one of those for the Q&As. And so we shouldn't have this problem moving forward again. So that explains why the next 20 minutes or so of, well, the end of part 2 and part 3 will just be kind of like a podcast with a random B-roll over it. Hope that's okay. We were just going to scrap it and not do a part 3, but we've decided, well, we answered the questions. You guys are mostly here for the audio, so hopefully that's okay. If not, stop the video here and we're done. Bye.
What are your thoughts on the change Nvidia has been trying to make with linearizing pricing to performance with the Halo product? In previous generations, the 80 class was the anchor and you'd pay double for 10 to 20% more performance in a 90/Ti/Titan card. Now they want us to pay half of the 90 class price for half of the performance, a quarter for about quarter, essentially democratizing the luxury tax down to the mainstream buyers. And yeah, I think this comes down to Nvidia and AMD to some extent, sort of changing the pricing scheme. Previously, it was that sort of, as the lower tier products come out, they became more bang for buck, really.
Yeah, you paid a premium every time you went up a performance tier for the extra performance.
Yes, whereas now it seems that Nvidia is trying to incentivize the higher tier. So by making this sort of linear scale, they're sort of saying, well, if you have $500 to spend, have you thought about spending like $100 more to get the 4070? Similar to price to performance, right? Like,
the bulk of the reviewers said that the 6900 XT and RTX 3090 were dumb because they were dumb, right? They were like 10% faster for double the prices. And they're like, well, if you think that's dumb, how about we really like the price of the RTX 3090 and AMD's like, well, we really like the price of the RTX 6900. So how about we just use that as our pricing structure and then it can't be dumb anymore.
That's basically what they've done.
And that's what they've done. So, well, yeah, they're like, how about we make them even more expensive and then go off that?
Yeah, but it seems pretty clear, especially with things like the 4060 Ti 8 and 16 gig models, that they're trying to incentivize that extra sale, which tends to make better margins for them. Whether or not this is going to be a successful strategy remains to be seen. You've talked a lot in the past about Nvidia and AMD trying to recondition the market. So previously we had that nice system where down the stack cards get more and more bang for buck, more affordable, cost per frame gets better. They're trying to recondition people to accept that GPUs are expensive, premium luxury products, and you have to pay a premium luxury price for that product. Now with this generation, not really working too well. Most GPU sales are not good and people aren't really interested, but if it means that for the 50 series, everyone is now conditioned to this new pricing structure, then potentially they have that benefit down the track. So,
and that's what will happen, because the 50 series will offer a nice performance bump over those parts at each price tier.
Yes, pretty much. So, yeah, that seems to be what they're trying to do. This is part of it, the sort of, let's switch to this incentivizing higher tier sales. The previous model kind of incentivized the lower tier sale. Like something like a 3070, you almost incentivized to buy the 3060 Ti because it was just a little bit slower, but it was like $100 cheaper. That's dead. That is not happening anymore. So it's unfortunate for shoppers, but at least people are voting with their wallets and sort of saying, no, not acceptable. I want this, this, or this, whether that's VRAM or price to performance ratio or performance uplift. So from that sense, you guys are putting pressure on. It's just a matter of whether there will be any sort of reaction to that. So we just have to wait and see.
All right, Tim. With the recent confirmation that Starfield, everyone's excited about Starfield, by the way, it'll be locked at 30 FPS on the Xbox. Have you ever considered covering the lies that were told from this console generation? Seems more like your sort of thing, such as 4K 120 FPS, 8K gaming, variable refresh rate, and how many games actually achieve Sony/Microsoft's advertising. My PS5 box has 8K on it, lol.
Yeah, the 8K gaming or output thing, I mean, that's pretty unlikely that a console like that would ever have supported 8K gaming. I mean, do they even support 8K outputs? I know HDMI should be able to do it. It's a question of whether they can. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. That's a moot point. There are some games that support 4K 120 hertz. I think they're mostly a few multiplayer shooters and racing games. So I guess the advertising is accurate because
I think Fortnite can be played at.
I think the performance mode is maybe.
I don't know if it's at 4K, but I think it can do 120.
Yeah, I mean 4K has become muddled because even when they say 4K 30 FPS, they mean 4K upscaled at 30 FPS. So that whole 4K discussion has been completely destroyed over the past couple of console generations. But yeah, I mean 4K 120 FPS, 4K. I guess that it happened for some games, but this is exactly what happens with all console generations and the sort of console versus PC thing. You know, Starfield comes out, they're trying to push the engine and the graphical fidelity, so it's a 30 FPS title. Sure, that's a developer choice, which I guess I'd probably disagree with because 30 FPS is not great, especially for a first-person game. But
that's kind.
Yeah, but again, you know, some people say they like it, so whatever. But you know, obviously the issue is that at the start of the console generation, they're sort of mostly working with cross-platform games, which are going to give people, you know, they're trying to optimize them for PS4 and stuff. They can run those at 60 FPS. And then as the generation goes on and developers are trying to do more with their games, create new features, really push the edge, developers revert back to 30 FPS because that's all the consoles can realistically handle. It sounds like a game like Starfield, there'll be some CPU limitations there in terms of, you know, with all the systems and stuff they're trying to integrate into the game. So this is just the life cycle of consoles. You know, how often did we hear back when the PS5 launched that this destroyed PC gaming? Like, you get this good quality, it's running at 60 FPS now, 4K, games load so fast, PC gaming's dead. And then now we're coming into the Starfield generation where I would assume that a higher end PC will run it at 60 plus FPS at higher quality settings. You know, it's going to once again create that. It brings PC back into that premium experience, which I think is going to revitalize PC gaming a bit.
Yeah, I mean,
at the sacrifice of console gamers, unfortunately.
Yeah, what you were saying, like consoles use PC hardware. They use it in a unique way, a very unified way that's very efficient. So therefore, the modest hardware they generally start off with yields really impressive results initially, but then as RTX 4090s come out and then eventually become more mid-tier performance 5 years down the track, the last few years of the console generations are rough. Like,
yes,
they're so far outdated, it's not funny. And they just become meme-worthy, sort of laughable, almost halfway through their lifespan that starts to kick in, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, with these 30 FPS games, it's starting to kick in now. And I would be very interested to see the reception from the gaming community who have sort of we've gotten all these 60 FPS games finally on consoles that people are used to playing. They've got these performance and quality modes. People can choose performance. But then to take away the performance mode for the back half of that generation's games, it's going to be interesting to see if more people start noticing how inadequate 30 FPS is. Because I feel like a lot of the discussion around, I'm fine with 30 FPS, you know, I've never noticed the difference, is coming from people who mostly are playing at 30 FPS. Where I've always found is that once you go up, it's like, yeah, okay. But when you come down, it's really noticeable. Like, wow, this feels really slow and sluggish and the input's bad, and you notice it more going the reverse way. So it'll be interesting to see people who've played flagship games at 60 FPS, like games that look really good, like they're not sacrificing heaps on visual quality, to then suddenly go to a Starfield that runs at 30 FPS. It'll be very interesting to see whether 30 FPS is deemed acceptable by console gamers again. It's up in the air on that one, but again, PC gaming is going to see a rise, I would have thought. When can we expect to see a change in your overall graph layout regarding textures not loading in on VRAM limited cards? FPS really isn't relevant if the textures don't load in, and I'm sure the audience would like to see some sort of indication that the graphics didn't load in properly, even if the supposed FPS counter says that they are getting high FPS, example here being Halo Infinite. It's clearer in games like The Last of Us Part 1 when the FPS just tanks, versus a game that's still maintaining perfectly fine FPS, but the landscape around you looks like turds.
Not good. Look, nothing's going to change there because this is not new. I get where you're coming from, but VRAM limited graphics cards are pretty much all graphics cards. Eventually they become limited by their VRAM. That's just how it goes. So, yeah, we saw this one going from 4 gigabytes to 8 gigabytes. Admittedly, the transition sort of 8 gigabyte. I think the problem we're having now is with the 4 to 8 gigabyte cards became more mainstream before they were really required.
Yes.
And then we haven't seen the transition to like 16 gig cards. We haven't had like one or two generations of 16, well, especially from Nvidia, one or two generations where 16 gig cards were just massive overkill and unnecessary. But because everyone already had them, then things progress into it. So we haven't had that smooth transitional period. We've been held back on 8 too long. Developers have come out and said they've been, optimizing to try and make games work for 8 gig. They're kind of over it. It's too much work. They want to move beyond that and focus optimization resources on bug fixing and other things rather than making, the games look decent for 8 gigabyte cards. So that's where we are there. As for the benchmark graphs and that, as you've noted, when you run out of VRAM, a few different things can happen. Textures can be missing, which leaves you with muddy textures. There can be texture swapping and popping, which is the same sort of thing. That can sometimes introduce a few frame hitches. Like it's an in-between mode of, and then you can get The Last of Us Part 1 where it just breaks. The Callisto Protocol, A Plague Tale Requiem, they're another examples of that. Halo Infinite is an example, like Forspoken, where the textures just go missing or the detail goes missing and you end up with like this. You go from a finely rendered bush to just a blob. And it's just it's a 2D blob that turns as you walk around it. So that sucks. But the good news is, I suppose, is that it's not a situation where some 8 gigabyte cards work, some don't. So you're like, is this one that works? It's like, look, in this game, when you use these settings, if you haven't got this much VRAM, it either runs like garbage or you're missing textures. So it's sort of a known universal thing for all 8 gigabyte cards. And yeah, it's not apples to apples results technically because one is a different presentation than the other, but it's just, that's what happens when you have enough VRAM. Like that's the problem with the card.
Yeah, but you've been showing more quality comparisons in your reviews.
Because that transition period hasn't been like it used to be. We never really had to worry about it too much because the 4 gigabyte cards got phased out before it became a problem well ahead of time. But unfortunately, we haven't seen that with 8 gigabyte cards, so it's a little bit different there. And I think people know now when you have a 4 gigabyte RX 580 or a 6500 XT, for example, you're going to run into VRAM problems. You're going to have to use low quality textures. That's just a given. So, yeah, bit awkward that it's happened the way it has happened. We saw it coming, though, back with the RDNA 2 GeForce 20 series generations. We kind of thought this would play out the way it has, and it looks like we were right. It certainly has, and it continues to get worse. But again, as we've stressed as well, this it's really only a problem for high-end 8GB cards. So in 2023, cards that cost $400. A couple of years ago, cards that cost $500 to $600. But we're not talking about, your maybe even RTX 3060 Ti. We're not really talking about for that 2.5-year-old product. We're not talking about 6650 XTs. We're not talking about RX 6600s. Again, our concern is the expensive 8GB cards that absolutely should have had more than 8GB of VRAM. Anyway, probably enough on that one. All right, Tim, that actually does do it for this month's Q&A series. We are done and dusted. We'll be back in about 4 weeks to do it all again. Hopefully, I don't know. Hopefully there'll be something exciting going on in the industry, some new hardware worth buying.
Yeah,
I don't have high hopes.
Well, it's the mid-season lull. You know how things go around these months.
There's no real new games or anything either until later in the year. So
when it's winter for us, usually there's not much going on. So since people in the US are probably out enjoying their summer, but for here, it was very rainy when I was driving here. So.
Yeah, the weather sucks today. So really what we're saying is we need you guys to up your game. We need you guys to step up. Yep. We need some gold questions for next month.
We need some parts to blow up or something. Every time there's things that blow up, people like
that works well. Yeah, I'll set something on fire.
Yep, sounds good.
Leave that with me. I've got 4 weeks to work it out.
Nice. All right, well, thanks everyone for watching the episodes, especially if you watched all 3 episodes to the end.
Very good
Much
effort.
appreciated to those people. We do have Patreon and Floatplane if you want to support the channel directly. And I would say you're supporting our question answering, but really you're mostly supporting the independent testing, buying hardware. You just did 35 motherboard comparison. I think you had to buy a fair few of those boards.
Quite a few, and then ended up with doubles because some of them arrive late, but whatever.
Yep, fun stuff there. So
I'm over it.
You're over. You don't want to think about B650 ever again.
It doesn't hurt me to talk about it anymore. I'm past it.
All right. So thanks to everyone who supports us there. Thanks for watching. I'm your host Tim.
I'm your host Steve.
We'll see you in the next one.